Hello, today I'm going to be showing you how I put together this log cabin blanket. It is a beginner level, beginner intermediate, because it contains no purl stitches. It is 100% knit stitches. So first to start, you're going to cast on 12 stitches. After that, you are going to knit for 23 rows. You're going to knit all stitches. Every 2 rows that you knit, you will produce 1 ridge of garter stitch. So we are aiming for 12 ridges. So we're going to knit 23 rows plus a bind off row. Turning your work, go ahead and continue knitting all stitches. Here we go, onto row 24. We are going to bind off. We're going to knit 2 stitches and then pass the first stitch that we knit over the second stitch that we knit. And continue that same pattern all the way across. Knitting 1 stitch and then passing the previous stitch over. Knitting another stitch and then passing the previous stitch over the needle to bind off that stitch. Continue with this method until you have 1 stitch left on your needle. Go ahead and cut your yarn, rotate your work 90 degrees, and then in each of the 12 ridges on the side of the work, we're going to pick up a stitch. So joining in our new yarn, we're going to pick up 12 stitches along the side of the work for a total of 13 stitches. The 12 stitches we picked up in the new yarn plus the 1 stitch that we left on from the previous bind off row. Turning your work, we're going to knit 11 stitches and then knit 2 together, which is going to join the last 2 stitches, one from the previous color and the second from this new color, for a total of 12 stitches. Rows 2 through 11, we're going to knit all stitches, and that's going to give us 6 new ridges. Make sure you have 6 before you bind off. Same method, we're going to knit 2, passing the first stitch over the second, knitting another stitch, and then passing the previous stitch over. Continue this way until there's 1 stitch left on the needle. Clip your yarn. And now in the 6 ridges we just created, we're going to pick up 6 new stitches plus another 12 stitches on the blue section for a total of 18 new stitches, 19 stitches on the needle. And now after we pick up 18 stitches, first we gotta double check, there's actually 18. Go ahead and turn your work, knit all the way across, knitting together the last 2 stitches, joining the previous yarn with the new yarn. Knit for 11 rows, a total of 6 ridges, and then on row 12, we should bind off. Same method, knitting 2 stitches, passing the first stitch over the second, knitting stitch, past the previous stitch over the needle, and binding off that stitch. All the way across until there's 1 stitch left. Hopefully by now you're starting to understand the pattern, the sequence of adding a new log piece on the side of your blanket. So in theory, we could make this blanket just a giant log cabin blanket, starting from the center and working our way out. But I chose to do several smaller pieces, and then seaming them together. Alright, after we bind off all the stitches, all but one of the stitches, we're going to join in a new yarn, picking up 6 stitches in those 6 ridges in the beige color, and then another 12 stitches in the blue color in that center square. That's going to give us a total of 18 new stitches, 19 total stitches on the needle, because we have to count the last stitch from the previous section. After we pick up that last stitch, turn the work, knit all the way across the row until you come to the last 2 stitches, and knit those 2 together, joining the previous yarn and the new yarn. That's going to be row 1, and then rows 2 through 11 are going to be all knit stitches. After row 11, we should have a total of 6 ridges. Go ahead and bind off on row 12, knit 2, pass the slip stitch over. Sorry, not the slip stitch, pass the previous stitch over. All the way across, leaving 1 stitch, cutting your yarn, and then we're going to join in and pick up 24 stitches on the side of the work. 25 total stitches on the needle. Turning the work, go ahead and knit all the way across row 1 until you come to the last 2 stitches. Knit those 2 stitches together, joining the 2 colors of yarn. Rows 2 through 11, we're going to knit all stitches, again giving us 6 ridges. And on row 12, we're going to bind off. Leaving 1 stitch on the needle, go ahead and clip your yarn, and now we're going to pick up 24 stitches along the side of the work. 25 stitches total. And once you pick up that 24th stitch, go ahead and turn the work, and row 1, knit 23, knit 2 together. So we're going to knit all the way across into the last 2 stitches, joining those last 2 colors of yarn. Turn the work, knit rows 2 through 11, and on row 12, we're going to bind off again. Here we go, we should have 6 ridges, and now we're going to bind off. Knitting 2, passing the previous stitch over the second stitch. Knit 1, pass the first stitch over. Knit 1, pass the first stitch over. All the way to the end of the row. A couple more times following the same pattern. We're going to join in our new yarn, and this time we're going to pick up 30 stitches. The farther in we go, the bigger the blanket gets, so the more stitches we have to pick up. After that 30th stitch, we should have 31 on the needle. Go ahead and turn your work, and row 1, knit 29 stitches all the way to the last 2, and go ahead and knit those last 2 stitches together. Followed by rows 2 through 11, go ahead and knit all stitches until you have a total of 6 ridges. Turning the work, and on row 12, we're going to bind off. stitch on the needle, clip your yarn. Joining in our new color, we're going to pick up 30 more stitches, having 31 total on the needle. Do your best to make sure the 30 new stitches are evenly spaced across the entire side. And as we come up to the edge, picking up that 30th stitch, we're going to turn the work and row 1, knit all stitches until the very last 2, and knit 2 together. Turning the work, rows 2 through 11 are going to be all knit. Just double check that you have 6 rows, 6 ridges again. Binding off on row 12, we're going to knit 2, pass the first stitch over the second, and continue. All the way till there's 1 stitch left. Go ahead and clip your yarn, and now we're going to add in our last color. For this last piece of the cabin blanket, we're going to pick up 36 stitches. This is going to be the longest piece yet. After you pick up the 36th stitch, you should have 37 total on your needle. And now turn the work. Row 1, we're going to knit 35 stitches or knit to the last 2 stitches on the needle. Go ahead and knit those 2 together for a total of 36 stitches. And now we're going to knit rows 2 through 11. That'll give us the last 6 ridges that we need. And on row 12, we're going to bind off. Knit 2, pass the first stitch over the second, knit 1 more, and continue. And that's really all there is to it. You can keep adding more pieces to your blanket along the sides, or you can do what I did and make multiple squares and seam them together with a border. It's really up to you. Go ahead and pull through the slip knot. And the most important part of any project, sew your tails in. Now my log cabin blanket is made up of squares that have about 9 pieces. Each piece has 2 tails, so that's 18 tails per square. My blanket has 9 squares plus the border. So yeah, I was sewing in tails for quite a while. I didn't sew them in as I made them. That was my first mistake. So at the end, I had every tail left to sew in. And it was very time consuming. But here's the final results. I'm very happy with it. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you give it a shot. It's a very easy pattern.